Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're excited to talk to you guys today about navigating the WMS journey. So that means everything from selection to implementation and post-go live success. We will begin momentarily, but first we just wanted to go through some quick housekeeping items. First and foremost, we like to make this as interactive and value-added as possible. So if you do have any questions, we ask that you utilize the chat in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. I will be your moderator and will be monitoring those and making sure to ask those as they come up. And then secondly, we do want to remind everyone that the information discussed in this session really represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute legal counsel as needed for specific situations. Awesome. With that, I'm Brenda Stoltz. As I said, I will be your moderator. I'm Senior Managing Director with Alpine and excited to kick things off. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. So we've got Derail Miller from CJ and Greg Utter. I will turn it over to them for self-introductions. Darian?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you guys for having me. My name is Derail Miller. As Brenda stated, I'm the Senior Manager of WMS for CJ Logistics. I've been with the company, I'm starting my 17th year this year, and I had the pleasure of working with the Alpine team. I'm not going to say from start to finish, but from start to ongoing in this entire selection process. And today we'll just review what that process looks like and how Alpine assisted us, and at times they led us into this selection. So I want to give a big thanks for you guys for having me today, and just thank you for all the help you've given us during this process.
Well, thanks, Darian. I appreciate it. I'm Greg Utter. Welcome, everybody. I'm one of the Senior Managing Directors at Alpine. I've been in supply chain my entire career, close to 40 years. So this webinar is all about WMS selection, and we're really lucky to have Darian with us. He can speak from the perspective of somebody who's driven forklifts and picked orders all the way up to the senior manager level that he's at today. So kind of a unique perspective in all of this, and want to thank him again for joining us. So here's our agenda for navigating the WMS journey. We're going to go through the overviews of the companies, the selection process, implementation overview, integrations, configuration, design, testing, training, and then lastly, go live support and post go live. Like Brenda said, if you've got questions, please utilize the chat button or the question icon, and we will get to those when we get to them. These are more fun when they're interactive. So first off, who is Alpine? Well, we are a boutique supply chain solutions consulting firm. We do not sell any software. We only sell consulting services. So the portion circled in yellow is what we're going to be talking about today, and it's supply chain systems. Everything from system justification and requirements to selections, implementation support, change management, systems changes, and we work with a variety of software solutions, most things that end with S, WMS, LMS, TMS. We also have strategic planning, warehouse consulting, and labor management. So we carry the full gamut of all warehouse and distribution supply chain consulting needs. As you can see, a relatively small group of individuals, but all very much seasoned. Experience with a lot of years. We've got 350 plus projects completed since 2017, about 130 amazing customers and 40-ish team members. You can see quite a bit of gray hair. And what we're going to talk about today, kind of going from the bottom up, where we started this journey was a system justification for CJ, through requirements gathering, system selection, in this case WMS, implementation support services, and then post-go live audit and support. And Darian mentioned it, it's a journey. We are only starting it. There are a lot of distribution centers within the CJ empire, so we are starting, and we've got a couple of go lives under our belt. I'm going to hand it over to Darian now to talk a little bit about CJ. Darian?
Yeah, so thanks, Greg. So yeah, when we hear the name CJ, I get asked the question often, what does CJ stand for? So the CJ Group profile was established in 1953 by Chow J. Dang, better known as CJ, and it began as a food manufacturing company within the Samsung Corporation. In 1993, it was spinning off from Samsung. CJ Corporation had developed its business portfolio in four core sectors: food and food service, biotechnology, entertainment and media, and retail and logistics. During my tenure at CJ, I would be responsible for onboarding new hires, and I would always ask, have you seen the movie Parasite? And people who've seen the movie Parasite, that is a CJ owned movie, right? So that's where, we're kind of in that entertainment and media, and somebody like me coming from the supply chain side, I just think that that's really cool that we have that entity under our belt. So like I said, we deal with logistics and retail, entertainment and media, food and food service, and biotechnology. So the CJ mission and vision is we continue to strive to be innovative with the goal of providing services that achieve a high standard of excellence worldwide. We're well known for executing global strategies. CJ now has presence in over 30 countries, and we'll see some of that on the next slide. But we are U.S. headquartered in Des Plaines, Illinois, and we are globally headquartered in Seoul, South Korea. So Seoul and, in Korea and in the United States, we have a mission and vision, but this is where they tie in together. In the middle use of the screen, you see we have what I call our core values and our CJ only one. We want to be first, we want to be the best, and we want to be different. And then from a talent standpoint, we're looking for exceptional talent and exceptional culture. Where shared growth is our other core, and we want to build the ecosystems with a shared value, and our principles will always remain integrity, passion, creativity, and respect. And as we go through this webinar today, we'll see how Alpine partner with us and we fit into these core values that CJ has. So as I talked about that global network, we are in 34 countries that have 271 cities and 424 hubs. So be curious, as you guys travel the world, if you're traveling about your day, you're going to see that CJ logo. It could be at a movie theater, it could be at a grocery store, just various different places around, your day-to-day travel and endeavors that you'll see CJ. And as we talk about the CJ Logistics America, we are currently at 80 plus locations, and we are rapidly growing. 30 plus million square footage, which is rapidly growing as well. And then you can see some of the places that were listed below. Like I said, Illinois is our headquarter in Des Plaines, so we have a bunch of business in the Illinois area. But I'd also like to call out between California and Pennsylvania, we do have a bunch of centers there as well as Georgia. And here's what we do with our integrated supply chain solutions. We're going to offer TES, which is Technology, Engineering, Systems, and Solutions, supply chain consulting, warehouse management, supply chain packaging, transportation management, and freight forwarding. So why a new WMS? And this is probably one of my favorite slides because to me, this is where we really show how Alpine was able to help us and guide us. We realized a problem internally that we needed to replace technical debt. So our legacy WMS is your older AS400 green screen. And where we were trying to take our company to the next level, we realized that our WMS just couldn't handle it. And some of our original programmers and developers, they're at the stage where they're ready to retire. So they had some transparent conversations with our executive team about, what it would take to continue using our legacy WMS. And I think our executive teams, they knew right away that we needed to make a change, and we need to make a change soon, but we need to be accurate with making that change. And we are going towards the business model for a multiple customer public warehouse space. So in those 80 plus locations, about 65 of those locations have multi-clients in there. We need a system that can handle that and handle that efficiently. And then we're also trying to expand our business portfolio. The project that Alpine came on to with us, the initial site was a cold storage site down in Gainesville, Georgia. And you'll see how Alpine helped us and got us to a successful startup. And then we want to be scalable, right? We want to speed to market. We want to be able to onboard customers and be able to gather their business requirements and not take 6 to 8 months to a year to do that. Once we get our golden template together, we want to be able to get these guys onboarded and up to speed as fast as possible. And as well as customer choice and preference. So we do have customers that when we are out advertising what we do, that say, hey, I need a WMS that, X, Y, and Z, and we need to be able to provide X, Y, and Z without so much development or configuration work. And it just, the way the world's going, it's 2025. We're looking for advanced technology. And that's what led us to say, hey, we need to go find a new WMS, and we need someone to help us find a new WMS.
Okay. Well, thank you, Darion. I really appreciate it. It's funny you mentioned CJ being in a lot of places. Not sure if there's any golfers out there, but they're actually hosting again this year the CJ Cup, which is also known as the Byron Nelson, which happens the end of April, first part of May. So that's exciting news. So I'm going to talk about the WMS selection process overview. So what does it mean? What does that really mean to select a WMS? Well, when we came into this with CJ, we come in as a facilitator. We don't have any vendors that we pick above others. It's a process where we provide, in this case, CJ, with all the information they need to make the decision to go with a vendor that meets or exceeds their requirements. So we work with the key stakeholders, we gather the requirements, we put together at this stage, it was about a 115-page RFP document to several tier 1 WMS providers. You can see kind of the Gartner Magic Quadrant in the bottom left. But they were all innovators and leaders within that Gartner Magic Quadrant. We went through a series of processes, RFP. We create scorecards. CJ scored all the responses and ended up with the top 2 vendors. They ended up with Kerber, recently changed their name to Infios. You might also know them as High Jump, and another tier 1 WMS provider. When we went through the process in the middle where we developed a problem statement, we figured out what was needed. We built a business case that was the discovery process. We looked at the current state architecture. We looked at the vendors who would qualify themselves to be able to handle the kind of work that CJ is doing, not only now, but into the future. Darion mentioned getting into cold chain, where there's a lot of specific things that happen within cold chain that we needed to make sure that whatever providers we looked at could handle that. So again, we created the RFP. What makes Alpine a little bit different is after we give the RFP out to that select number of vendors, we invite them to come on site to walk the floor, to look at it, to see what it is that they're answering these questions to. Because what we put together this RFP, it's not the traditional 400-line Excel spreadsheet. Yes, no, do you do this? It's a very detailed, please explain to us how you can do this requirement using your solution without changing code. They answer the RFP, then we schedule demonstrations with all the stakeholders. During those demos, we also pass out scorecards to the team, and they define and they weight the categories and they score that demo. Once we've scored the demos, Infios Kerber was the clear winner, and we went into contracts and ended up with contracts. Well, that's not where it ends, right? So once it ends through this number of series of things that happen on this chart, you can see that there's a line down the middle, and you can see bubbles above and bubbles below. The vendor has Alpine and CJ in this case. So you can say it's a shared event. There are a lot of things that happen within both of our organizations, but you can see the weight of what the responsibility is throughout the process. During this process, we have quality gates. So the expectation. The same way with the second quality gate, third and fourth. So by the time we got to the end, all the boxes were checked and we've come up with the vendor that we wanted to. Well, once that happens, then we start talking about some systems implementation support. the stuff that happens after the contract, right? Now you're married. Now you're going to go on your honeymoon and you're going to figure out how to get this implemented. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the implementation overview. So now we've got Kerber, we've got the vendor of choice selected, and we're going to talk about the implementation. And it has a lot of events, a lot of phases. And different vendors have different phases, but more or less, they're all about the same with different naming conventions. And the first part of it is the design. So we take and leverage what we found out in the requirements, all the things that has to be done within the operations to make them successful. And we use that as a springboard to help with the design sessions. And that's where you're sitting down in a room with a bunch of really smart supply chain people from the customer, the vendor, and Alpine, and figure out, how do I want this system to be configured? Is the facility prep in the right place? Do I have the right kind of barcode labels on my doors, on my racks? And we document that. And after you've documented that, then we start testing it, and there's data support behind it. And then there's training and go live support and post go live support. And then we do the loop about the follow on site. So take this big blue blob that you see in the middle of your screen and just place on top of it months of activity, 9, 10, 12 months, depending upon the complexity of the building for the first site. Darion mentioned the golden template. What our goal was is to build a template that I could use as a golden template as I move forward through my supply chain, to my different buildings, to my different warehouses, to my different types of activities in a warehouse, whether it's cold chain or catch weight or whatever nuance is there. So this is a very high level about what that implementation overview looks like. To get a little deeper within that, and I can't drain this slide, but get deeper in that, specifically under facility prep, here are the things that we look at and we do. Under solution design and blueprint, those are the things that are happening in the background. All the way through go live support. So when we're going through and you're hearing about what are the failures, what are the lessons learned, which we'll get into in the last slide, is what are the things that you should have really focused more on to have a better go live, a better success. And it usually is fundamentally three things. It's integrations, it's testing, and it's training. Those three are the key things that you need to make sure that you're doing steadfast with a project, with a schedule, and check boxes to make sure that you're going through all those. So when you get to the end of it, you have a very successful project. And Darion, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about how did we figure out who does what.
Yeah, Greg, I appreciate that. I think, some of the things that you just said is a great segue into this slide that you guys are seeing now, is the roles and responsibilities, right? And it wasn't that the CJ team couldn't do it, but we did try this before with another WMS, and we realized that there were a bunch of lessons learned. And one of the major thing was we already worked 50 plus hours in our day job, and trying to select another WMS, something would get the short end of the stick, shall I say. So we realized that we needed someone to come in and to help guide us to this selection. So Alpine coming in and helping us, they told us the things that we would be responsible for, and then the things that we would be accountable for, as well as consulted and informed. And one of the things is, we always hear, well, the vendor offers that. The vendor may not tell you everything you're responsible for until after you have signed an agreement with them. So Alpine was able to come in, ask the questions of us and of the vendor of who's going to be responsible for this piece and who's going to be responsible for that piece. And it was just a, full accountability measure and very transparent for them to help guide us through this while we still had to perform our day jobs.
Thanks, Darion. Next part I'm going to talk about was one of the first things that was the key to be successful, and that's integrations. And I'm drawing a very simple integration map, right? I'm making it look as simple as I possibly can. But no matter what you're going to be implementing from a WMS standpoint, there are going to be other solutions within that bubble and within that chart that you're going to have to integrate to. And the information is going to go either one direction or both directions, coming back and forth. And this chart makes it look pretty easy. And I think if you talk to most vendors and most people who have done implementing, they talk about a half a dozen straightforward integrations: purchase orders, sales orders, inventory adjustments, etc. And that is pretty much true, but you have to understand the nuances for each of those different integrations. You also have to understand, do I want to implement a management solution when I'm doing this? or an order management solution when I'm doing this, or a transportation yard management, WCS if you're running any kind of control systems, or any type of material handling. Those are all considerations that you have to take into place, not only when you're building your integrations, but when you're building out your test plans, when you're building out your training plans. It's often taken for granted that this just comes together and it's all going to work. Well, I can tell you from experience, it doesn't work that well, that easy. It's got to be tested and it's got to be trained against. Darian, I'll let you talk a little bit about the specifics on integrations with CJ.
Yeah, so just for some of the complexity with 3PLs, it's just not the customer's ERP to the WMS. So we had a middleware that we have to go through, and in that process, Alpine helped us communicate with our vendors as well as our internal teams to get that map right for the ERP. So very, very more complex. There's double the communication. We actually, at the suggestion of Alpine, we created some roles that strictly work on vendor mapping to the supply tables. And it's understanding any field restrictions, what's required, what is optional, and then how do we communicate failures back to our customer and to our vendor as well? From an internal standpoint, we need to communicate both ways. The data flow triggers the timing and acknowledgement that goes into hours and hours of testing, communications, and Zoom meetings. And then one of the biggest call out is going to be the volume testing, right? Just getting, a few tests completed is not going to supplement what you want to do. We need to test, retest, double test, and then test again. So, and then our testing environment and any situation should always be as strong as our production environment. Before you ever deploy anything to production, you want to make sure that when it went through test, it's going to see the same volume and same traction that it would see in production.
Thanks, Darian. The next part of it is about configuration overload, and I'm going to give that back to Darian again.
So, configuration overload. This is what you hear all the time. The good news is that it's highly configurable. The bad news is that it is highly configurable. And I'll tell you this just from experience. When you get in a situation where things are highly configurable, everyone has an opinion and they have an option. And those, something that's too configurable can become very complex. And when you have to undo things, those same configurations that you love, you will despise. So nearly all WMS software vendors can handle your business requirements with configuration settings, reducing the need for dreaded customization or enhancements. But one of the things that we learned from a prior implementation was, for transparency, we had over 300 plus configurations. We went into this project wanted to stick close to base out of the box as possible. And Alpine's help with that was the leadership from Alpine and the project managers from Alpine. They sat in discovery sessions with us, and we told them before the discovery sessions, hey, we want to keep this out of the box and base. And as we began to talk, and from a WMS perspective, when we said, hey, we want this and we want that, one of the things that I can say that, Greg himself kept doing was he would always pull us back in and say, hey, do you want this? Or do you want this to be out of the box? Because that's not going to be out of the box. And it challenged us as an organization to go back and say, do we really need this today? What's important to us? So that was our goal with keeping it, keeping it base, keeping it out of the box. And we didn't want to create something that was very customer specific. And then as we began to deploy this across our 80 warehouses, we come up with basically 80 different solutions. So we went with a golden template model, and Alpine has kept us true to that golden template model.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it. So that brings us into that first discussion that we were having about where do we start? And it's really in the design phase. So we've broken it down kind of in the top 10, right? One in the bottom right being what we consider to be one of the most important, simply because it gives an advantage to the people who really don't know how to read a 300-page systems requirement document, right? Those are pretty hard. So what I would say from our approach, Alpine approach, that works very well with our customers, is invest in the training early. And I know I said training about training for the software, but this is training also to understand what the software can and can't do. What does it look like? How do I navigate? Not more how I do the functions, but just the overall strategy. And then talk about mods contingency, right? So as much as we want it to be 100% vanilla, that rarely happens, right? There are always custom things that need to happen, an enhancement, whatever you want to call it. So you have to plan for that. Now, one of the things that we do when we're talking about design and we're talking about changing what is base is we put into enforce a pretty strict governance policy. And what we do with that is, hey, if we need something that is not in base and I've got to do an enhancement, first we've got to put a requirement out there. We've got to understand what the cost is and what the benefit is. And then we run that by the executives, and the executives have to put their pen on it and say, yep, we approve this and we're going to go forward. It's one way to keep a cap on those. The next one is prototyping the environment, laying the groundwork. And then number 7, embrace an agile approach. To iterate and improve. And this is kind of what Darion was saying too. They've got 80 sites, right? So we want to build as much of a golden template as we can, but it's not going to be perfect. So you also have to understand that I may want to change or may need to change certain configurations to move into a different environment, a different operating structure. I might have to turn on expiry date when I didn't have to before. Then I'm also going to log key requirements for future releases. So one of the things we did during our design sessions was, hey, we're going to build a golden template for site 1. Site 1 did not have catch weight in it, but we knew Site 3 was going to have catch weight in it or would likely have catch weight in it. So instead of discounting it and saying we're going to wait, we logged that as a requirement. We understood it's going to be a requirement, and we logged that as a future change to the configuration. The next one is including micro value demos. And what that means is, hey, I'm gone through, I'm now configured, and I'm configuring receiving. Let's not wait till I'm going to get completely done with configuration. Let's do many value demos. I'm going to show you what we've configured for receiving. Does this look like what we designed? Yes or no? And you can change from that also. Then paralleling the integration design. We got to sync up with tech and ops, right? So you always hear, is this an IT-driven project or is this an ops-driven project? And usually it's one or the other, weighted a little heavier than the other. We like to be as much 50-50 as we can because everybody's got skin in the game. Then we also engage the vendors, tech PMs very early to champion the vision and continue to put out performance metrics. Where did you start? Where are you going? And how do you need to get there? Do I have key performance indicators that I have to meet? If I do, let's keep up with those. And then the very last one, and I think it was really important, and it is very important, it's one thing to see Visio flows of how I'm going to do something from A to Z. What we did at CJ is we blew those Visios up to be a large chart site, stuck them on the wall. People could stand up and look and see, this is where I do a scan, or this is where I do an enter key. And it really helped visualize that process. Reflecting back to the other way that it used to be done, there used to be lengthy narrative documents. You can't absorb a 200-page document. It's very difficult to review. It's not that it's wrong. It's just most people are visual as opposed to reading through this lengthy of a document. And I'll let Darion talk a little bit more about what I said earlier on the design approach that Alpine takes.
Yeah, so we were able to get our project team up at our corporate office into a room and have those sessions with the vendor and talk through what the flows were. The vendor sent those flows back to us, and as we understood them and we signed off on them. Alpine suggested, and we followed their lead, and we got all of those flows hung up on the walls. And what we did was we split off into groups, just so that each group had a chance in a smaller section to review each flow, talk through the processes, and we were able to take sticky notes and put our comments on each flow. And once every group got to review every set of flows, we went back and we took those sticky notes and we read those notes, and any comments, any call outs, any concerns that we had, We addressed those as a whole, and then we worked through, and that helped us really design what our solution looked like. I'll tell you what else it did was it gave the team a leg up on process flow. So when we did get our hands on the system and we were ready to start testing, it's kind of etched in our brain exactly how the process should flow. And then it allowed us to also avoid extra clickiness of the system because as we talked through those steps, hey, why are we clicking so much? That was some of the things that were written on the sticky notes. So we were able to go back to the vendor ahead of time and say, hey, there's too many steps here for clicking. We can take those 4 steps and put it down to 1. And that helped the vendor, helped us, helped the system become, more smoother and operate more optimally.
Great. Thank you very much, Darian. The next session we're going to talk about is the testing side of it. And similar to what we saw in design, we've got a playbook, right? You're going to see this repeated again in another couple of slides, but it's our playbook for testing. So to start out, develop a comprehensive test scenario. We've got a very deep test repository. And although receiving, there's a lot of different flavors of receiving, there's fundamentally you bring in a truck, you receive the stuff, and you put the stuff away, right? So we've got a lot of base scripting for testing that we can leverage to make it flow easier and add to. The next thing is focus on data accuracy. And this is key. And we're working with a couple of customers now where this wasn't great, right? So the data needs to be current, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be in volume, right? It's one thing to test one purchase order or one sales order. That doesn't happen real world. They're receiving multiple POs at once. They're selecting several sales orders at once. So volume of data is very, very important. And it's got to be realistic test data. Most people don't receive a single line PO, right? It's multi-line POs with multiple products on it. So make it as realistic as you can. During that, validating the hardware infrastructure and the equipment integrity. It's not unheard of to bring the printers that you're going to be using for whatever purpose into the offices where you're doing the testing to make sure that they work, make sure they print out the labels correctly. And then negative testing, error conditions. Nothing is happy path. Most days have a few happy paths, but most days, they generally go off the happy path. Purchase order didn't arrive. It's got items on there that weren't supposed to be on there. It's got too many that were supposed to be on there. No purchase order at all. So you also have to devise ways to test for non-happy path. And then you have to assess the performance. Stress testing, volume testing. Validate the user roles and permissions. So all the WMS packages out there have roles and permissions. Can a receiver do put away? Well, maybe in some buildings they can, maybe they can't. So you're going to validate the roles. Then you're going to document your testing outcomes. Thorough issue tracking, right? So it's one thing to say, yeah, I did 100 tests today and I think 5 failed. You have to accurately document those. And then test end-to-end workflows, right? Meaning you do a receipt, then you do a put away, then you do a pick, then you do a replenishment, then you do a shipping, all from the system integration testing standpoint to make sure everything talks back and forth. And then my number one is conduct UAT, user acceptance testing, in a controlled environment with real users and real users validating the results that you think you should have as your outcome. Darian, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the testing.
Yeah, so I like to start off by saying that within our WMS implementation project, one of the things that Alpine suggested of us is testing truthfully became its own project within the project. And I'll kind of explain, Greg has kind of elaborated on that. But what they suggested that we do is we create a testing team within our implementation team, and we identify a project manager or a project lead that own testing. I think that this ultimately became one of the most creative things that we've done because from that, we developed what we call a mock warehouse. And we did a mock setup of what our facility was going to look like. And then that testing team and testing lead worked with the Alpine team, and they gave us a template of all testing phases, testing scenarios, testing situations that you could think of, right? Greg talked about, the break it scenarios or the non-happy path scenarios. You testing those scenarios right there allowed us to catch issues ahead of time, right? It allowed us to catch all the flaws before we implemented that system. And so how we did this was the testing phases were unit tests. As the vendor finished the inbound piece of the WMS, we had an inbound testing phase. And then we had an outbound testing phase as they completed that component of it. So, and then from there, we also did what we call system integrated testing, where we tested the integration, making sure that the data was flowing properly to the WMS and from the WMS back to the customer's ERP. Once we did the unit test and the sit testing, it's not on here, but I'd say that we did the part that we did along with UAT is end-to-end testing. We took our testing team and we let them test the entire process flow front to back. And then from there, once we were comfortable with that, we went into a UAT where we grabbed users in our organization that had previous knowledge with other systems, and we said, "Hey, come test this thing out end to end and tell us if it makes sense." And what we did is when they tested it out, we had feedback sessions with them, and they gave us honest and transparent feedback. They allowed us to catch some clickiness that we didn't catch when we were reviewing everything on the Visio charts that were hung on the wall. And when, it created dialogue and conversations just for us to develop a more optimal system, as I said. And then one of the most important things that I think we could have done is we did do some ORT, that operational ready testing, making sure that the data was clean, making sure that we were ready to go, and we did our final stress test of the system. And we were able to perform this in our production environment because we hadn't went live with the WMS yet. And that allowed us to get the users at the site that were doing some training. We were allowed to bring them in on some of the true testing that the team was doing and build a relationship with them. Our testing scenarios and test strips had to be aligned with our configuration. So as we made changes to the WMS, our testing lead would challenge his team to go back and make sure that they align with the system. So and we'll talk about some like the work instructions. So then once we did that piece, we had a technical writer who was over our SWIs, our standard work instructions. Once we made those changes to configurations and changes to test scripts, she would follow the new steps and then update our work instructions. We went through about 8 cycles of that until we got that cleaned up the way that we needed to be. And as Greg said, error fixing. So as we talk about error fixing, we dedicated daily meetings to talk about testing and the errors of testing. And all of those errors that we had, once we tracked those on a log and make sure we got those error fixed, retests had to be generated for all of that. So it had to be considered successful for the retest in order for us to go to the next phase of testing. And what that does is errors found late in the process, they need to be classified as a showstopper unless there's agreement for a workaround process can be utilized. And it requires updates to documentation and training. It does. But I will say this, the big piece to those errors, because we did run across some issues that we were able to resolve. And the biggest reason why we were able to resolve with them is because we called the issues out. We were transparent about what they are. We worked with our vendor to get the solution and then get an estimated time of completion. And then once we've done that part, it was back on us as an organization to push to get those retests completed and make sure that they were deemed successful before we move forward.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, Darion. And here's what you were talking about just a second ago.
Yeah. So what you guys see, this is exactly what it is. This is what we reported out daily. It has a number of scenarios, number of pass scenarios, and number of fail scenarios. And if you look at the bottom or the middle of the page where it says notes, 12,786 test steps completed. And I'm here to tell you that I watched our team complete every last one of those steps, and I watched Alpine help guide us through the meetings. They guided us through the process of communicating errors out and making sure that those errors were corrected and implemented.
All right,
hey, Darian, we do have a couple of questions before we move on. Sorry, Greg. One is, how big was your testing team, as in how many resources and for how long?
So full transparency, our testing team, I think that is a great question, by the way. So our testing team was made up of two leaders from the actual site. We had engineering involved. The IT, our Kerber IT team was involved. We had continual improvement involved. We had our learning and development team, who you'll learn more about shortly. We had two members of their team involved. So there were about 12 members of our testing team, 12 to 14 members. And I know that sounds like a big testing team, but as I stated earlier, we have 80 sites, and we were thinking future state of taking that team and breaking it out into smaller teams so that we can deploy our WMS effectively and efficiently in multiple sites at one time. So our plan is to have multiple implementations going on or conversions going on at the same time, and not slowing things down just because there's one team and not that many people are the SMEs of the WMS. The testing, I see the question that says that the testing slow the project down. I It didn't slow the project down because when we set the project plan, we set a large amount of time for testing. We did put some buffer in there. I think the part that concerned me the most was when there were errors, system errors that were presented, when we didn't have a resolution for them. It's that moment of uncertainty. Is this going to get fixed? But I will tell you, working with our vendor and having Alpine facilitate responses from the vendor and plan of action, it put us at ease, and it allowed us to stay on path. Greg, Brenda, I know you guys are on, but you guys probably can elaborate on the amount of time that we spent on the phone together, the amount of time that you guys spent working with the vendor as well, and just making sure that everything happened on time. I feel like the biggest gain from the testing output was it allowed us to truthfully be comfortable with the system. And then when small challenges arrived, when we did go live, we were completely comfortable with our vendor and confident that they were going to turn it around. So I think that's the biggest gain was the feeling of confidence and comfortability with our vendor that they would correct any issues that came across.
Perfect.
Did I miss any questions, Brenda? Just want to make sure.
Nope, you're okay. You're good, Darian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next would be training. So again, the playbook and top 10. So first, train leadership personnel during SIT, right? So your leadership needs to be the persons or people that champion the system, because they're going to be also very visible as it rolls out to multiple locations. We also took into place train the trainer, empowering the key users. And Darian will talk about this a little bit later. Why did train the trainer? Why was it important? Schedule the trainers for trainees, right? Have a game plan. Don't just do willy-nilly. Make sure that they understand when, where, and how long, because again, they have jobs that they've got to complete as well as doing this. Utilize as much e-learning platform as you possibly can, off time, off hours, not in a building, but when you have an opportunity to do e-learning. And then multimodal training, right? So there are different training styles that we can bring to bear, talk to you about, see which one fits your categories, fits your business the best. Contact knowledge assessments, right? Testing the testers, right? It's one thing to say, did you complete these tests? And they complete the test because they're using the work instructions or the SOPs, but did they understand why they were testing it? Did they understand what the output was supposed to be? Provide on-demand support, whatever helpline you've got, whether it's a 24/7, whether it's a schedule, whether it's somebody that you know that you can get a hold of to have on-demand feedback. It's very frustrating to have a failure and not know where to go and who to talk to. Learn from the trainees. The feedback is key. Mentioned several times, the little sticky notes Darian mentioned on the board, right? Feedback is key because oftentimes they're not vocal and they won't come out and tell you, but they will put it on a sticky note and stick it on the board. Then create clear and visual documentation, the treasure maps, the work instructions, the things that they're going to refer to during the beginning and the initial phases of the project. And then lastly, the change management strategy, right? Don't rock the boat. When we talk about change management, it's organizational change management. It's from the top down and from the bottom up to make sure that everybody's on the same page to ensure that we have a non-event event when we do go live. And Darian, I'll let you talk a little more about training the trainer and why it was important.
Yeah, so I'll take the next couple slides and kind of explain what we do from a training standpoint. And I'll talk about training the trainer, and then I'll get into what our, dedicated training team does. So from the training standpoint, like I said, as we developed our project team, one of the questions that was asked was how big was it? We, working with Alpine, we identified very early in our process that we needed to add site leadership to our training team and to our testing team, more importantly. So as we went through those phases of testing where we were doing some unit testing and sit testing and end-to-end testing, our site warehouse manager and shift supervisor, they were a part of this team every single day. We implemented them to the team, baked 100% of their time and dedication into this project team. That allowed those guys to be strong and show as confident leaders to their team. When we went live, they were the ones who addressed their team. It was not our project team. If there was an issue, it was them addressing it. And I'll be transparent. When we went live, the project team was on the site, but when we got our first load, we received our first load in, and they were having issues, I instructed the entire project team to sit in a meeting room, in the conference room, and let the site leadership run their building because we wanted their team to see that their leaders were confident in the system and that they knew what they were doing. That allowed us to build a relationship with the site leadership and their team, as well as give those guys confidence that we had trust in them. So it's very, very critical that training the trainer on any project that you guys are doing, that you get someone from the site involved and let them be a part of the team that develops the system. And also, like the biggest thing is developing a succession plan, right? We call it hypercare in some situations, but we need a successful plan that allows the team to be comfortable, so that when you do reach go live, that the leadership of that team can handle it, and the project team can move on. So the another thing that I do want to call out is the training plan and execution. So we do have a L&D team, learning and development, and they, very skilled. They have their own training plans. But one of the things that I think was very key was Alpine. They reached out to us and said, hey, we want to review it, right? Because if there's something that you guys may have missed, we just want to review it to make sure you have that. So we were setting up weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings with our L&D team and reviewing their training plan, reviewing every tool and documentation that they had. We got the feedback from Alpine, and we made any adjustments that we needed to our training plan, so that they were comfortable that we were going to deliver what we needed to deliver to the users that were going to be operating in our system. And so our training assessment and evaluations, they're very key, because we need to know that once you train someone on something, how much are they truthfully retaining? So one of the things that we did was, after we trained them and the site went live, we went back about 6 weeks later and we did an assessment and evaluated, were they still following the standard work instructions, or had they developed their own habits and went away from what the training playbook or training plan should be. So once we got those evaluations, we went back and said, hey, there's a loophole in our training plan again, because the operators have started doing their own thing. And we adjusted the training plan, and then we also coached those operators so that they knew that, hey, you need to stick to the plan and let's keep pressing forward. And then the one of the things that we also did was a training schedule and tracking. So we have new hires coming into a WMS, trying to teach them on everything at one time. They're probably not going to retain much of that. So we broke it down by functionality of the system and by position of the operator. Depending on what position they were going to work in, that's where we started to train them on. And we developed classroom training with the schedule and time, and we also put that out there for those guys to see that agenda, so they know exactly what they're going to be trained on and when.
Thanks, Darion. All right, so we're going down the home stretch. Want to be respectful of everybody's time. The next is the go live, right? The non-event event, go live, support, and post go live. So again, the top 10 things that you need to consider. You need dedicated on-site support team, right? It's boots on the ground, understanding the system, going from video calls as opposed to being boots on the ground. We way prefer being there on site. Real-time troubleshooting channels, right? It's key. Don't let bad news get old, right? Communicate. Backup system access, right? We don't want to think about backing out and turning something else on, but always have a contingency for fail-safe. Emphasizing the cross-functional coordination, being collaborative and efficient, extended hours of support from the vendors. Ask for this early. Most vendors have it. Sometimes they don't talk about it. Make sure that the vendors understand fully that you may need off-hour support, and then have role-specific super users, targeted user support. So we always talk about a super user, right? And depending upon how big your facility is and how complex it is, you may have a super user for inbound and a super user for outbound and a super user for inventory control, or that may be one individual. We'll help you guide to see which is the right mix for you. Do frequent check-ins and feedback sessions on go live day, the post go live day, the next day. Have hourly meetings, check bases, double check with people to make sure it's going well. Reinforce the training materials. Darion talked about this. They deviated from the training a couple of days into it. Well, in a lot of cases, that deviation was the right way to do it. So they rewrote the work instructions. Be proactive in monitoring the metrics. I talked about KPIs way early in this process. Now's the time to start looking at those KPIs. Am I meeting what I said I was going to meet? Have I met the obligation of leadership? And then lastly, celebrate the wins, celebrate the acknowledgement of the efforts. This was a lot of hard work, time, energy, and effort to get here. So we go through an approach, we review it, we look at the flash reports. How many orders did I ship today? How many eaches did I ship today? How many pallets did I receive today? And oftentimes this is published on a large screen TV out on the floor so everybody can see it. Where are my goals? Where did I hit? How well am I doing? And this helps reinforce that leadership, from leadership down and from the bottom up, all understand what I'm looking for and striving towards a common goal. During this go live, we have readiness tests. They're go, no-go meetings. And this is where everybody's got to come to the table and be honest. I'm going to schedule major milestones. I'm going to poll people. Are these things completed? Did I do those? Is the go live checklist ready? I'm looking at the staff. Is the testing complete? So I'm looking at the chart on the right, which is a large Excel, and I'm saying, yep, this is done. No, that's not done. If it's not done, who's responsible for it? So keep that go live readiness alive and keep it working as a working document and work the document to make sure that you get it done. Go live day, it's the cutover plan, it's game day. What happens if it doesn't work? Have a contingency plan. Have an escalation plan when its software problems arise. You've done your homework, nothing's supposed to go wrong, something might go wrong. So be ready for it. Have a vendor support plan. Have your system, have your subject matter experts ready. Have the shift coverage ready. All the things that you think of, but make sure that you have a list and that they're all documented well. And lastly, the lessons learned. Document those, especially if you're going into multiple sites like CJ is. I can tell you that they took lessons learned from site 1 and applied them to site 2, lessons learned from site 2 to site 3, and on and on and on. And then post go live, have this conversation very early. What's the next site that I'm going to go live with? Why is that the good next site? Is there another reason I can go to a different site? So have those conversations. And then also talk about, will the next site require additional configuration? Do I need to hold a new design? Can you utilize the plans from the first one? And use that experience from the previous sites, the people who worked it, the people who were there for go live, use those to train the future site trainers, and then repeat that process so you don't burn implementation teams out. Use the people that are going to be getting the WMS next to support the previous and then the next. And then align with the vendor on timeline between the sites. Communication, communication, communication. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the lessons learned on this one. It's not very often you get for a redo. Darion mentioned they used a different WMS before. They made some mistakes. They've learned from those mistakes. They had executive alignment. I can tell you from the very top down, the executives were aligned. For the vendors, if you're sending out an RFP, let them visit your site. Make sure you have a detailed implementation and a strategy review. Do reference visits. Understand what the SLAs are, what their hosting process is. How do their upgrades work? Talk to them about importance of the item master data, dimensional data, location sizes. Am I going to go real time or am I going to go batch? Am I going to put in a WMS and an LMS at the same time? Understand what it is that you want to go have as a goal as you move forward. So, in summary, understanding the overall roles and responsibilities of both the vendor and the client is crucial. You also have to have honest assessments of the existing resources to determine if you've got the bandwidth and the talent to complete this client-side responsibilities. This is where Alpine stepped in and worked alongside the vendor and CJ to make sure that it was on time and on budget. Delays are costly. Don't get them out there. And then involve the resources very early in the project. Create a solid cross-functional team of subject matter experts to help with the design, the implementation, and the systems implementation support. So I want to thank Darion very much for his participation in this. We couldn't have done it without you. And Brenda, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, it looks like we got a few minutes left, so I'm going to just do a couple of questions here. The first one, Greg, what is the most compelling reason based upon experience that might convince someone implementing a new WMS to not do phase go lives from site to site, but rather do a big bang approach? So all sites at the same time.
Oh gosh, that's an experience that I've been through a couple of times and I'd rather not do it. So if you've got multi-sites, our recommendation is go big bang in site one from receiving to shipping. Hold off on doing a multi-site go live at once. It's very hard to put the right people in the right place for the right amount of time. It can end up being very costly if you do have a system defect that you can't ship to customers out of multiple locations. And I would say do a backup of those locations. In case you do have failure in your first location, you can still ship products from other locations to fill those customers. The customer SLA should be the most important thing that you have on your plate.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. And then just one for Darion. We'll do this last one. Looking back at the breakout of roles and responsibilities, how big of a CJ team was needed to support all the responsibilities you had?
So I'll answer it like this. There were 5 departments that were needed when we talk about the race season or the roles and responsibilities. Operations, IT, continuing improvement, engineering, and learning and development. So there were 5 responsibility heads, I'll call it like that. Within that, those leaders in each department broke out the responsibilities to their direct report. So if I had to give you a number of how many dedicated team members we had, there were about 15 people, but 5 departments that led all the roles and responsibilities from a CJ perspective.
Awesome. And Darion being key, I will say. So I just want to second what Greg said. Thank you, Darion, not only for your participation in this webinar, but also for your participation during the whole project. It's definitely made it very enjoyable for us to work with CJ, and we look forward to continue to work together, right? Greg, thank you as well. Before we do end the webinar, I do want to remind everyone of our next webinar, which is going to be in May. And we're going to shift a little bit, although it's still about the warehouse and it's still system related. We'll be talking to you about another client where we implemented a labor management system. So please come back on May 28th. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, guys.